Good evening. Tonight, we bring you a comprehensive report on one of the most disturbing criminal cases in modern American history, the Jeffrey Epstein files, a story that has shocked the nation, exposed the darkest corners of wealth and power, and left countless victims waiting for justice for over 2 decades. It began quietly in March 2005, a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, Florida. Her parents noticed something was wrong. She had been paid for what she called a massage at the mansion of a wealthy financier named Jeffrey Epstein. When they went to the police, they had no idea they were about to open a case that would eventually involve millions of pages of documents, videos, photographs, and the names of some of the most powerful people in the world. The Palm Beach Police Department started investigating. What they found was horrifying. Girl after girl came forward. Teenagers, some as young as 14 years old. They described a pattern. They'd be recruited, often by other young women they knew from school, offered money for massages, $200. But these weren't ordinary massages. Epstein would touch them inappropriately, demand sexual acts. And here's what made it even more sinister. He'd encourage these girls to bring their friends, to recruit more victims, creating what prosecutors would later call a vast network of abuse. By 2006, the investigation had grown. The FBI got involved. Federal prosecutors identified 36 girls. The evidence was overwhelming. Epstein had used his wealth, his connections, and his manipulation to sexually abuse dozens of underage girls. This should have been straightforward. A powerful man caught preying on vulnerable children. But what happened next would become one of the most controversial plea deals in American legal history. In July 2006, a grand jury indicted Epstein, but only on one count, just one: solicitation of prostitution. The Palm Beach police chief was furious. He said publicly that this charge didn't reflect the totality of Epstein's crimes. But something was happening behind the scenes. Epstein's high-powered legal team was negotiating. They were talking with Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney in Miami. For a year, these negotiations continued. Epstein's lawyers argued that the accusers were unreliable. They attacked these young women. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors had prepared a much more serious indictment. But in 2008, a deal was struck. And this deal, this non-prosecution agreement, would haunt the justice system for years to come. On June 30th, 2008, Jeffrey Epstein walked into a Florida courtroom and pleaded guilty to just 2 state charges: solicitation of prostitution and solicitation of prostitution with a minor. His sentence, 18 months, and not even in a real prison. He was sent to a private wing of the Palm Beach County Jail with work release privileges. That meant he could leave during the day, 12 hours at a time, 6 days a week, to go to his office. But the worst part of this deal was kept secret. The non-prosecution agreement gave immunity not just to Epstein, but to 4 named co-conspirators and any potential co-conspirators. The federal government agreed not to prosecute them for any of these crimes. And here's what's truly shocking. Epstein's victims weren't told about this deal. They weren't consulted. They were kept in the dark while their abuser essentially walked free. Epstein served 13 months. 13 months for abusing dozens of underage girls. He was released in July 2009, required to register as a sex offender, but free to continue his life among the elite. His social circle included presidents, princes, scientists, actors, and business moguls. And for years, it seemed like he had gotten away with it. But the story wasn't over. In November 2018, everything changed. The Miami Herald published an explosive investigation by reporter Julie Brown. She had spent a year tracking down and interviewing roughly 80 women who said Epstein had sexually abused them between 2001 and 2006. Her reporting was devastating. It connected the dots. It showed how Epstein's wealth and connections had protected him, and it put intense pressure on Alexander Acosta, who by then was serving as Secretary of Labor in President Trump's administration. The public was outraged. How had this happened? How had a man with so much evidence against him received such a lenient sentence? Questions swirled about Epstein's high-profile friends. What did they know? When did they know it? The reporting reignited demands for justice. On July 6, 2019, federal agents arrested Jeffrey Epstein at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. He was returning from France. This time, there would be no special treatment. He was charged in Manhattan federal court with sex trafficking of minors and conspiracy to commit sex trafficking of minors. The charges alleged that from 2002 to 2005, Epstein had created a vast network of underage victims in New York and Florida whom he sexually exploited and abused. When agents searched his Manhattan townhouse, they found thousands of photographs, nude and partially nude females, at least one believed to be a minor. The judge denied Epstein's bail request despite his offer to post $100 million. He was deemed a danger to the public and a flight risk. Days after his arrest, Alexander Acosta resigned as labor secretary. But then, on August 10, 2019, everything ended abruptly. Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. The medical examiner ruled it a suicide by hanging. His death sparked conspiracy theories that continue to this day. Some believe he was murdered to protect powerful associates. Others point to failures in prison protocol. 2 guards were later charged with falsifying records, having allegedly failed to check on Epstein when they were supposed to. With Epstein dead, the criminal case against him closed. But the investigation into his co-conspirators continued. And attention turned to one person in particular, Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell was a British socialite, daughter of media tycoon Robert Maxwell. She had been Epstein's girlfriend and later his close associate for decades. Prosecutors alleged she wasn't just complicit in his crimes. She was an active participant, a recruiter, a groomer, someone who helped normalize the abuse and made the girls feel comfortable before handing them over to Epstein. On July 2, 2020, federal prosecutors in New York charged Ghislaine Maxwell with sex crimes. They said she had helped recruit and abuse Epstein's victims from at least 1994 through 2004. Her trial began on November 29, 2021, before Judge Allison Nathan. The trial lasted a month. And at its heart were the testimonies of 4 women. Now adults, they had been teenagers when Epstein and Maxwell abused them. Their stories were gut-wrenching. One woman, who testified using only the pseudonym Jane, described how Maxwell recruited her when she was just 14. How Maxwell would ask about her life, seem interested, seem kind. How Maxwell was there during some of the abuse, making it seem normal, acceptable. Another accuser, Carolyn, testified that when she was 14 years old, Maxwell touched her breasts, hips, and buttocks. Maxwell told her she had a great body for Epstein and his friends. Carolyn described bringing other girls to Epstein's mansion, receiving $200 for each one. She was following the pattern that had been established, victims becoming recruiters. Annie Farmer testified under her full name. She was 16 when Maxwell massaged her naked chest at Epstein's New Mexico ranch in 1996. She spoke of how Epstein had offered to help her with travel and educational opportunities, how Maxwell encouraged her to accept this help, how she was made to feel indebted, grateful, until the abuse began. A fourth accuser, known only as Kate, testified that Maxwell invited her over and directed her on how to give Epstein sexual massages. Maxwell spoke often about sexual topics with her. Asked her to invite other young girls to satisfy Epstein's desire for 3 weeks. The jury heard from roughly 30 witnesses, staff members from Epstein's properties, investigators, pilots from his private jets, evidence from searches, email threads, a hard drive. All of it painted a picture of a systematic, calculated operation to exploit vulnerable young girls. On December 29, 2021, the jury reached its verdict, guilty. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted on 5 counts, including sex trafficking of a minor. She faced up to 65 years in prison. At her sentencing hearing on June 28, 2022, 4 victims spoke. They described the long-lasting effects of the abuse, the trauma, the nightmares, the broken trust. Judge Allison Nathan noted the victims' disturbing testimony and Maxwell's direct and repeated participation in what she called a horrific scheme. She sentenced Maxwell to 20 years in federal prison and a $750,000 fine. Maxwell's attorneys said she was a scapegoat for Epstein, that she was being punished for his crimes, but Judge Nathan was clear. Maxwell was not being punished in place of Epstein. She was being punished for the role that she played. Now, fast forward to 2024 and 2025. The Epstein case was back in the headlines. In January 2024, a judge ordered the unsealing of documents from a 2015 defamation case against Maxwell. About 950 pages were released. Names of prominent people appeared in the documents. Former Presidents Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, Britain's Prince Andrew, lawyer Alan Dershowitz, physicist Stephen Hawking, singer Michael Jackson. Most were mentioned in passing and not accused of wrongdoing. But the public wanted more. Where were all the other files? During his 2024 presidential campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly said he would release the Epstein files if elected. His allies, including Kash Patel, claimed the FBI was withholding a client list. Trump Jr. accused the Biden administration of protecting pedophiles. The pressure mounted. In September 2025, Bloomberg News obtained approximately 18,700 emails from Epstein's personal Yahoo account. The emails covered 20 years, from 2002 through 2022. Some arrived after his death, showing how his email had continued to receive correspondence. The cache was authenticated by 4 independent experts. On November 18, 2025, Congress acted. The House of Representatives passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act by a vote of 427 to 1. The Senate approved it unanimously. President Trump signed the bill the next day. The law required the Department of Justice to release all files related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell by December 19, 2025. But when that deadline arrived, disappointment followed. The DOJ released only a relatively small batch of documents. Many were heavily redacted. Large sections were blacked out. Both Republicans and Democrats criticized the release. It wasn't what Congress had mandated. It wasn't what the public expected. And it certainly wasn't what the victims deserved. Then came controversy within the administration itself. In May, Attorney General Pam Bondi had informed President Trump that his name appeared in the files alongside what she called unverified hearsay. In July, the DOJ released a memo stating that no client list existed and that there was no evidence Epstein had blackmailed prominent individuals. But this contradicted what many believed based on the scope of the investigation. Some of Trump's own allies were reportedly upset. There were reports of confrontations at the White House. Elon Musk posted and then deleted a tweet suggesting Trump was in the Epstein files. Trump himself filed a defamation lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal over its coverage. He characterized the files as falsified documents created by political opponents. Finally, on January 30th, 2026, just days ago, the DOJ released the mother lode. Over 3 million pages, 2,000 videos, 180,000 images. It's one of the largest document dumps in Justice Department history. But even this release has problems. Attorneys for survivors say the DOJ failed to redact the identities of at least 31 people who were victimized as children. Some survivors have reported being harassed, receiving disgusting private messages. They're being victimized again. The documents contain flight logs showing who traveled on Epstein's private jets, contact books with hundreds of names, emails revealing his relationships with powerful figures that continued even after his 2008 conviction. FBI diagrams attempting to chart the network of victims and the timeline of abuse. A 2007 memo from a federal prosecutor outlining possible charges that could have been brought but weren't. Photographs have emerged showing Epstein with various celebrities and politicians. Some are heavily redacted in strange ways. Men's faces are sometimes obscured while women's faces are visible. The organization of the files is chaotic. Duplicate copies scattered throughout. Different levels of redaction applied to the same documents. One particularly disturbing document revealed that in September 1996, a woman named Maria Farmer complained to the FBI about Epstein's involvement in child sex abuse. That's 1996. 9 years before the Palm Beach police investigation began. The FBI did nothing. Farmer, now in her 50s, said after the files were released that she feels redeemed, that it was one of the best days of her life to have her complaint finally acknowledged. The files show that Epstein had relationships with institutions. He donated to a camp called Interlochen. During Maxwell's trial, a woman testified that she met Epstein and Maxwell there when she was a girl in between classes. They gained her mother's trust. The pattern repeats. Access to vulnerable children, building trust, then abuse. A prison psychiatric evaluation conducted before Epstein's death provides insight into the man himself. Despite having a huge social circle, he had few close friends. He was estranged from his only brother. His identity was based on wealth, power, and association with high-profile individuals. One evaluation noted he had been successful, wealthy, with many high-profile acquaintances accumulated through charisma, charm, and intelligence. But despite these many associates, he had limited, significant, or deep interpersonal ties. Today, the Epstein files represent more than 6 million pages of documents, images, and videos. They detail not just his crimes, but the failures of the justice system, the protection afforded to the wealthy and connected, the voices of victims ignored for years. As of this week, Attorney General Pam Bondi has stated that new charges against anyone are unlikely, despite all these files, despite all the evidence, despite the names of powerful people appearing in documents. The investigation, it seems, may be closing without additional prosecutions. For the survivors, this is a bitter pill. They were promised transparency. They were promised justice. What they've received is incomplete, redacted, and chaotic. Many say they're still waiting for accountability, not just for Epstein, who's dead, not just for Maxwell, who's serving 20 years, but for all the others who enabled this network of abuse. One thing is abundantly clear from these files. Jeffrey Epstein did not act alone. He had help, he had enablers, he had people who looked the other way. And despite the largest document release in DOJ history, many questions remain unanswered. Tonight, as we close this report, we remember the victims, the young girls who were exploited, who were paid $200 to recruit their friends, who were made to feel like what was happening was normal, who carry the scars of that abuse decades later. This is not just a story about one man's depravity. It's a story about institutional failure, about wealth-buying protection, about how long it takes for the truth to emerge when powerful people want it hidden. The Epstein files are now public, but the fight for full justice, for complete transparency, for accountability for everyone involved, that fight continues. I'm your anchor, and this has been our special report on the Epstein files. Good night.